To start, I want to invoke Tony Kushner, one of my favorite playwrights, for the spirit of this talk. He says, baking lasagna has long been my own personal paradigm for writing a play. A good play, I think, should always feel as though it's only barely been rescued from the brink of chaos, as though all the yummy, nutritious ingredients you've thrown into it have almost but not quite succeeded in overwhelming the design. The play should have been barely rescued from the mess it might just as easily have been. So my goal today is to give you a kind of tasty conceptual lasagna that astonishes you with how it holds together these weird ideas and the structure of it. It's not falling apart. But it might fall apart. And hopefully it'll still be tasty anyway. So this is our program for this morning. There's no intermission, that's a lie. So I couldn't resist making a little pun. It's a sort of musical pun. This is sonata form. So our introduction, I'm going to look back a little bit at the experiences and the questions that sort of brought me to this point. And then we'll move into sort of the meat of the piece, which is going to be, I'll define how I'm using ecotopia for you. And then I'll talk a little bit about what it means to say that music might be ecotopian, because that's kind of weird. And then the sort of, we'll move into the second half, which is these three concepts are what I'm thinking of as ecotopian possibilities in music. And then at the end, we'll do a brief coda where I talk about where I might like to take this. So I'm going to start by playing you, actually, one of my favorite pieces that's kind of stuck with me over the years. And it just never fails to move me. It's kind of a direct, raw experience of what I feel is just a deep mystery. And it grows with me over the years, and it has flowered into many fruitful questions. And hopefully it's queued up correctly. It's a piece by Aaron Copeland, and I'm going to play about 30 seconds of it for you. And the speaker and the projector is not what I'd like it to be, but it is what it is, and hopefully it gets some of it. So, the spirit of the thing. The last thing is not queued, right? There we go. So there was a lot going on there, kind of musically speaking, that we could analyze. We could talk about the melodies, the harmonic progressions. We could talk about the rhythms, the polyphony of many voices coming together in an orchestra. And listening to music like this has made me want to study those kinds of elements, and to be able to do that kind of analysis. And so I am pursuing that in the music department right now, to sort of get to be able to analyze music on that level. But that's not actually what we're going to be talking about today or doing today. We're going to be doing a different kind of approach, which is a little bit more sort of philosophical and conjectural. We're going to look for certain kinds of lessons in music, which elements that can teach us essentially how to live. So the lessons are things that I think take advantage of our emotional attachments to music and our sense of its beauty, which for me is deep and powerful. So how did I start thinking about these questions other than being moved by music in this way? When it first occurred to me to put music and ecology together and start looking for bridges between them. As with most such questions, it was very personal. So this is Stuart Kenny. He also doesn't know he's in this presentation. He's my first bass teacher. And he plays music for contra dances and at folk festivals and things like that all over New England, all over the country and the world. He's a wonderful musician and a wonderful person. Several years ago, I was so into that music scene that he was a part of, in the fact that it was sort of underground and kind of non-commercial in this really cool way. And it was just this beautiful, vibrant music of sort of modern, traditional music that I thought I'd like to do that, to essentially do what he does. And so we sat down with him and I said, yeah, I think I want to do what you do, but I'm also really concerned about environmental issues, and I don't really know what to do. And he said, is there a way you can do both? And, you know, he might have been thinking, you know, like, can you be a park ranger and play music or something like that? Which is really reasonable, right? But this is just not me. And so when I heard this, I was like, oh, yeah, how could I do both? What does that mean? And it was a scary question, it was an exciting question. It was like, I have no idea. So I said so, and it's true to this day. I still don't know, but it was a very fruitful question, and I took the challenge very seriously. And that was something that brought me here now. And I think I've managed to refine the question a little bit through reading and thinking about these things out loud with others, and I think I have some leads. So this is sort of a rephrasing of my question, and I guess potentially more academic terms or something, but how can music help get us to an ecotopian future? So what do we mean by ecotopia? I mean, simply, it's ecological utopia. It's a green utopia, a sustainable utopia. This painting, I think, is a nice representation of a certain kind of way of thinking about it. This is an ecotopia in San Francisco, as inspired by a novel called The Fifth Sacred Thing by a writer and activist named Starhawk. And it looks pretty nice to me. I mean, windmills, you got a lot of geodesic domes, that's always good. Everyone's got a bike, that's great. I don't see any cars, this makes me happy. But if you're someone who doesn't see yourself in this image or see your own sensibilities, you might disagree with me, and I think that's right. I think that's okay. There's a lot of legitimate disagreement. People get very worried when you start talking about utopias because there's this sense of pragmatically how we're going to get there. You know, is this something that's going to be coercive fascist state? Are they going to lock you up if you don't want to put a geodesic dome on your roof, right? And so I think those are all really legitimate concerns, actually. But the way I'm thinking about eco-utopia for this talk and in my work in general is a way of sort of sidestepping that issue a little bit by thinking of it more as a process than a particular place or a set of blueprints of, here's what we're going to do. And it's a sort of a set of ideals to strive for, and so, a utopian scholar has suggested, Lisa Garforth, she suggested we think of utopias as, quote, visions that stimulate critical and creative reflection on alternatives to the way things are. So that's kind of the spirit of ecotopia that we use. So, given that it's a vision, what does my vision look like? I thought I had a pretty good idea, and then it turned out I had to write it down on a slide, and it was like not exactly what I wanted to say. It was very like Western-centric and very human-centric and all this stuff, and that in itself is very interesting. I'm not going to go into it that much. So I boiled it down to what I think is this is pretty much the heart of it for me. Anyway, my vision. Knowing how to live and die well without causing unnecessary harm. Sparse. I like it. I think it says everything I want to say. It's got a lot of stuff in it. I'm going to draw out a few of those things that are implicit in it, just to kind of give you a little bit of what else I think this comes from. And this is just a very personal process. So this is not an exhaustive list. It's not like I didn't break it down and say, what are all the things that have to go in it? These are just kind of 4 things that jumped up to the top of my mind of things I want to practice if I want to practice sort of ecotopian values. So decenter myself and humans by recognizing the values of other beings. So values, I'm not talking about like how much would they pay for a whale to live, right? I'm talking about like what is the whale value? That's that kind of sense. Whether consciously or not, what do other beings value? Learn what actually nourishes me, what nourishes us. I think that is something that's a stumbling block for So these things might crop up in the other elements of music we'll talk about today, but they might not. This might be one of those lasagna layers that doesn't really come together, but it felt important. All right. Now that we have a kind of working definition of ecotopia, how might music be ecotopian? In the beginning of thinking about this process, I would often look at things like this. So this is just a really beautiful bone flute that is, I think, about 40,000 years old. This one, I think, comes from Central Europe. And these things I find really beautiful because they remind me how ancient music is, and sort of how natural also music is. And that, to me, that naturalness, originally I was sort of grasping at that for sort of why music could be ecotopian. But I started realizing and thinking that, to call something natural, I mean, it's beautiful. It's part of what we do. But to call it natural doesn't actually tell us anything about if it's going to help us to lead a good life. In my ontology, everything I do is natural. Everything we all do is natural every day. There's nothing supernatural about it, but it doesn't mean that I'm living that ideal, right? So there's got to be something else. It can't just be natural. It has to be ecotopian as well. And so what does that mean? How can it be ecotopian? I think it means, back in for a second, that basically that it has to help us learn how to live in something. And how do we do that? Well, I look to the past again. This is Hildegard of Bingen. I love this illuminated manuscript. I think it's just beautiful. She was a 12th century nun in what is now Germany, and she was a musician and a scholar. In the fall, I got to write a paper exploring her musical cosmos and kind of how music made up her world and how she manipulated it. So Hildegard, as you're seeing in this image, received music in visions. And she used music to identify her place in the world as a human being, a woman, a nun, and a virgin. And these were all really important identities to her, and she sort of played with them in music. She used music to shape her world. She composed music to instruct the nuns that were under her care. So, for example, there's just a really cool story that I just love, where when she broke with her superiors and founded a new abbey about halfway through her life, she wrote this piece called Ordo Virtutum, which is kind of a musical theater piece. It's plain chant, it's sung, and it's scored for many voices. And they think it was the nuns in her community who were performing this at the new abbey, at this sort of consecration of the new abbey. They probably wore these elaborate costumes that she designed, and they played these roles. They took on the roles of virtues, who, in the course of this play, the virtues vanquished Satan, and they rescued all of creation. And I just think this is really cool. I think this is an example of a musical act, a performance that strengthens our sense of community, and it can affirm, for the nuns, affirmed their worldly status and their theological status at the same time as virgins and as women in their world. So it's, for Hildegard, if I can kind of sum up, to me, one of the things that I drew out of this was that music was a way of simultaneously discovering, affirming, and performing duties in her world. And it's that kind of sense of music as identification and education that I'm kind of looking for in my ecotopian definition of music. And, so we're going to look at some specific features of music in the next section that I think maybe can sort of echo and embody some ideals of ecotopia and can help us discover, affirm, and perform our own duties in our world. So it's important to note that I don't want to argue that these are essential features of music that we're going to talk about. They're not things that I think all music does or should do. Music has this incredibly wide range of uses. But I am looking at what I think music can do and what I think maybe it should do if we want it to be part of a sort of ecotopian process. So this is where you get your refreshments, as promised, but there are no refreshments there. I was actually going to bake some cookies, but I kind of just ran out of time, and finishing the presentation was probably better. Although, maybe. You can decide. But I'm getting some refreshments. Okay, so ecotopian possibilities in music. So the first one, deep listening. So what do I mean by deep listening? So this term actually already has some psychological, some social meanings, some uses. And I wanted to use this in order to sort of play on those uses, but I'm also looking for something that's a little broader, sort of a more cosmological definition or significance. To me, deep listening essentially means showing up to the present moment and remembering that what I don't know is infinite compared to what I do know. So music often reminds me that something, or maybe a lot of things about the universe are always fundamentally unrepresentable. I cannot encompass it with my mind. No matter how much I think I know, reality always elegantly and effortlessly outpaces my ideas about it. And that's actually an incredible relief. There's a vastness to reality to experience. There's a fullness that is incredibly comforting to me. Because the world that exists in my own head is just completely bland and cramped by comparison. So there's a sense of showing up for the moment and releasing into the present. So I get this feeling when I walk in the woods alone, and it's kind of like, oh yeah, this is what it's like. You know, and I'm out there and I'm like, how can I forget all this stuff that's so vivid and it's so beautiful and so perfect? The stones and trees and the water and the stream. But we do forget somehow. It always recedes from you somehow. It always needs to be renewed. And I think that renewal is something that we perform very naturally with music. It doesn't feel like a chore to listen to favorite pieces of music over and over again. There's a rightness to it, and there's a joy that's just completely obvious. And it's so powerful and enjoyable that we want to share it with other people. So I think that actually, when you really stop and look at it, I'm going to contend that maybe every person and every being in every place and every moment has its own kind of music as well. And by practicing the ecotopian virtue, the ecotopian possibility of deep listening, maybe we can remember that our concepts are feeble and the world is wide, that there are infinitely many voices speaking right now, and maybe we can learn to hear them. So, this was something that I got late last night in an email that was an amazingly fortuitous coincidence. I think this is a wonderful confrontation with a reality that just resolutely refuses to be encompassed. So, I think we'll do this. Okay. We need you. Oh no. Yes.
This surely is one. This surely close up. The prunes are truly exquisite. Gauze. Of course, by the 18th century, naturalists realized that birds of paradise did have legs. Even so, so very well. But Carl Linnaeus, the great pacifier of the natural world, when he came to allocate a scientific name to this bird, called it Paradisia apoda, the bird of paradise without legs.
I just love it. It's so joyful and so like it's great. So that's what I mean by that's a kind of obvious confrontation with reality, but it's the kind of thing we need. Alright, more ecotopian possibilities in music. The second one, what I'm going to call embodied imagining. So the idea here is it's not enough to conceptualize music. You have to actually have the skill to bring it about. I'm pausing here because these are not exactly what I'm going to say. So sort of an experiment in polyphony, so we can experience this and then Okay, so I tend to approach things in a very sort of mind-forward kind of way. So the number of encounters that I try to conceptualize my way out of is actually quite staggering. It's actually really quite embarrassing. And my housemates have to witness it all the time. It's as if I think a Herculean effort of willpower is going to just solve all my problems, and maybe all of the world's problems as well. So a little story that I think illustrates this really well. Recently I was learning to play scales in an unfamiliar part of my bass's fingerboard. That's not my bass and not my hand, but it's a beautiful picture. So I was playing some scales way up the neck there, and I was really struggling. And my teacher said, "You realize you can't negotiate with the notes. They're there, they are where they are. You have to come to them." And it sounds really simple, but it was actually really important because in our minds we do this. So I think it's one of the great challenges of learning music, and also one of the great gifts. It doesn't let you just stay in your mind. You can't think your way through the problem. At some point you have to work it out with your body. You have to make it part of yourself. It's a different kind of knowledge building. And what that often means is understanding limits and paying attention to what happens when you try and fail. So I think there's some obvious connections here with ecotopia. So, learning to live within limits is, a major ecological task of our time. It might be the ecological task of our time. And I think if we can learn from music how to flourish within limits and how to create beauty, understanding that limits are always part of that process, that would be a really big deal, essentially. So, of course, also to the degree I think that we ever actually bring about ecotopian possibilities, it's going to be in precisely the way that we learn something like music. It's not going to be a drastic and sudden Herculean effort of will, but more of a slow building up of collective powers, embodying care, compassion, wisdom, grace. Thousands of tiny movements repeated over and over again until excellence becomes a habit, like breathing, like a master musician practicing scales. And finally, a third ecotopian possibility in music, performing complex relations. So music in a very literal sense is composed of relations. When you listen to or perform music, you're navigating a shifting web of patterns and signs, notes and beats, voices and silences. There are tensions that inevitably arise from taking all these elements and just rubbing them up against each other. And just like in a web, music actually also requires a certain amount of this tension to hold together. It's what makes it itself. So I'm going to play some intervals, some simple intervals. This person's going to play 2 notes at the same time, a few times in a row, and it's going to sound, well, interesting at least. Oh, starting at the beginning of your paragraph. I need to start somewhere over.
And augmented fourth. Dissonant, diminished fifth or augmented fourth. Minor second, dissonant. Dissonant, major seventh. Dissonant, major seventh.
So, quick show of hands, who actually likes listening to music that sounds like that? Anyone? Wow, some refined palates. Good. Okay. Well, the funny thing is, actually we all do, but we don't really know it. So the sounds you just heard are actually really common components of Western tonal music. These are incredibly common intervals. They're in all sorts of chords that you hear all the time. But the thing is, when you're hearing them in music, you're hearing them in context with other more consonant sounds. And the tensions are balanced in a way that they drive the music forward. So this kind of tension between those is actually considered really vital and necessary in this Western musical tradition, and it's what, to me, creates a lot of the beauty that moves things forward. And so people who make this kind of music learn to balance dissonant sounds with more stable sounds, and that works toward kind of resolution that actually is fundamental to everything. So what does this mean for ecotopian relationships? So, it's like my mom always used to say, it's a vast, interconnected web of being and becoming out there. Yeah, so can we learn, my question is, can we learn from music, this ecotopian possibility of somehow writing out the inevitable tensions of a complex existence? And I'm not just talking about, the little differences, varieties, the spice of life, but violence and harm that nobody seems to actually want, but nobody seems to actually be able to get rid of. So there's a way in which we might think that violent acts come from an excess of tension, maybe, or maybe a fear of tension, or we could say maybe just the unskillful management of tension. So earlier we talked about Hildegard. She was a musician who used music to understand and transform tensions in her own time and place, and she taught other people to do that. The same thing, and there are more people like her. And my question is, if we can follow their example and embrace that task of performing complex relations, performing this web, maybe we can learn how to balance the tensions that make up all of our societies, our ecosystems, the whole universe. Can we make friends with creation and destruction that tension inevitably brings? And can we take that tension into our own bodies musically and transform it into beauty? We're just about there. A couple things. So what's left after this? Well, turns out a lot. This is really obviously only just kind of the beginning. Some of the things that I'd like to explore, I've talked about a few ecotopian possibilities, but I'm sure there are a lot more in music. I don't want to look at composers maybe who have worked with this stuff, consciously or not, forms, musical traditions that display these kinds of ecotopian possibilities. I think that's kind of the bulk of the research element. I'd also be interested in trying to actually kind of start practicing some of this stuff in an embodied way. This third one is just a standard process for making music or for doing many skills. And that last one, I was talking to Adrian one day and I said, I think it'd be cool to put together an ecotopian chamber orchestra. And he said, that sounds great. What would that entail exactly? And I said, I have no idea. I just thought it sounded really cool. So maybe finding out what that means would be